Good morning and welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. Good morning.
Deuces, gentlemen. Hello.
Deuces. I like that. Cheers.
Is that a peace statement?
Hello.
I was gonna say peace.
Peace.
All right, I got to ask a little, just candid question here. All right, talk about your morning routine. But before I do that question, I do want to talk about our main topic today. Our main topic is a mailbag. These are questions that are coming from the audience. So thank you very much, audience, for bringing in your questions. We'll address some of those today and go through crafting Power BI workspace policies, thinking through that or unpacking how people can create workspaces. What happens if you have a lot of them? How do you manage them? What happens at the proliferation of workspaces? Okay, that being said, I want to come back to that main topic. But I was thinking, I was wondering, are you guys becoming coffee snobs? I work from home a lot now, and I have a machine that does the coffee for me at home. And I know, Tommy, I think you showed me, Tommy, your coffee machine. It's this little like pot. What's the thing called? It's the pot that's...
So I go back and forth between, it's called a Bialetti, which is the one you put like, I call it the immigrant coffee because it's on a range, but I do have an espresso.
Don't think you can say that anymore, but okay.
What are you talking about?
I'm just saying.
Talk to my grandfather. All right. Well, you can't, but but if you could have. But I swear by an espresso now.
Okay. So your Nespresso is your choice of thing. Okay. And Seth, you've got a pretty nice machine too at your house as well, I believe. You're pretty coffee centric as well.
Well, so one of my I used to do the espressos all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But I moved into like pour overs.
Mm-hmm.
If you go to a good coffee shop,
yes,
like a pour over takes like a good 10 minutes to make. So I always feel bad ordering them. But the coffee out of there just very mellow, and it typically you can go with a lighter bean, and anyway, went down that path. A lot of great flavor.
Yep.
So we ended up we got a Breville a long time ago.
Yep.
And it's one of these that so it's still drip, but you can set it to drip in many different ways. And then I think the big game changer is, I drink coffee all the way up to about noon. It's not glass, like the craft's not glass. It's a thermos. So just
retains, it's hot. So it's not time.
Well, it's not on a burner.
Oh, yes.
Right. So when it's made, it just stays hot until you pour your other cup.
Okay.
And we've gotten that in combination with a local coffee bean roaster.
Sure.
And I've found a happy place with coffee.
I found a happy place. The reason I bring this up is anytime I travel now, I've been traveling a bit more. And now that we have spoiled you're at home, you've got your routine, you've gotten the machine. I know what flavors I like. I know how many pumps of whatever flavor I want. Like I got it down to a science. And when I travel, it's not as good because I'm traveling and it doesn't just seem to have the right. It's not what I enjoy. It's not the whole. I can't do regular travel coffee anymore.
This just happened to me. I was traveling because I've been doing espresso for so long.
Mm-hmm.
We were at a Verbo Airbnb and they had a nice coffee machine. It was just coffee.
It's like a filter.
So it's less
coffee than
not even that. It's diluted coffee. It tastes more like someone put something in my water.
Yeah,
that's what American coffee tastes like to me now. It was like, why is my water hot and tastes slightly weird? I'm honestly at the point now where I'm going to bring my Nespresso with me anywhere. I can't. I need espresso. I need this. So it's
amazing.
Bad. Yeah.
So that was one of my points there was around, traveling is becoming more difficult because I like my little morning routine. I've got my coffee routine that I like to use now. But along with that coffee experience is I'm finding that if I don't have at least some coffee in the morning, I'm wrecked for the rest of the day. I've gotten so dependent on coffee these days. I get like headaches in the afternoon. I don't drink a lot of coffee. I have like my one coffee in the morning and that is it.
With last note 500 shots or
no, it's just a normal double shot espresso with milk and it's just, but if I don't have caffeine like in the morning with that, I don't feel good later on in the day. It's just, I can tell like around 2 or 3 o'clock, I'm like, I think I should have had some coffee this morning. So
I thought you're going to go a different direction with that. I thought location matters in terms of like if I have people staying and I can't go like out on the deck and have my food, no technology.
Yep.
By 4 p.m. or the next day I'm twitching. slightly kind of thing, just like with people. Like I'm so I need
No,
That's fun.
yeah.
What I was going to say though is we use flavors at our house. So we have like flavors that we buy online and Amazon. They show up and we use the pumps. Yeah, Seth, I know you're like you're straight up. We have tried or have recently heard around in order to add some more healthier options to your coffee, trying maple syrup straight from a tree. So we've been adding maple syrup, a little drip of, again, I like sweeter coffee. My wife likes it just a tidbit more coffee tasting and a lot less sweet. I like mine kind of sweet, but I have found that using maple syrup as a sweetener is actually really, really good. It's like, man, it makes a difference.
Yeah. So traveling, I'm okay, and I survive just ordering an Americano.
Yeah.
Which used to be my go-to drink, but the one change I've made over the years is I used to do sugar, and now it's just straight black. But in large part because like a lot of the intermittent fasting or not I'm not
they'll
a
let you drink black coffee, but they won't let you
have
any
anytime
sugar to
you
it.
incorporate sugar or anything like that, you're breaking your fast until
Big no,
right? So
yep.
That was one of the reasons. But I actually enjoy just straight black coffee now, regardless of where I am. Like I used to like the sweeter maybe once in a while, or it was like the ritual of a couple packs in, and now, I just like the taste.
I'm just amazed by the volume of, like, my wife loves a French press.
Oh, yep, I know. Yep, I have one of those.
Still, it's a lot of volume of coffee, and mine is condensed into this same amount of caffeine. I'm amazed at how large his coffees can get. And Mike, all my coffee mugs have to have something Power BI on it too.
Oh yeah, same. All SQL Bits one are good.
And then I have like 14 Power BI ones from you.
Good shout out for SQL Bits on this one. Tommy's drinking out of the SQL Bits coffee mug today, which is great. Excellent.
That's fun.
I got to be honest though, I can't do any cups at my desk without a lid. I will not do it.
No way.
No way. That's
all
too
it takes
risky.
Is once. All it takes is once.
It takes one tip over and boom, gone. So all over the keyboard, all over the whatevers. So I have intentionally make sure that everything around my desk has a lid on it as much as I can.
That's so smart.
Tommy knows.
From what I heard a while ago, since this is coffee roasting talk.
Yeah, sure.
I think I'm under the impression that lighter roasts actually have way more caffeine than espresso.
Really?
Yes, it's true. Or a lighter roast.
The roasting doesn't like darker. Break down the caffeine, I guess would be what it would be, right? I've heard that too.
Behind it. What's that?
Did you say more than espresso or more than dark?
Yeah. More than dark. So if you had a lighter espresso versus a darker espresso, there's more caffeine than lighter because I think the roasting doesn't break down the caffeine.
No, I know. Are you saying like if I had an American light roast, that's gonna have more than my espresso, or we're just talking coffee?
No, just general like lighter roast beans is going to have more caffeine than darker roasted beans.
It's counterintuitive.
Kind of seems counterintuitive. Yes. Yeah, I don't really like the bitterness of more darkly roasted beans. I kind of like a medium to lighter roast of things. It seems to fit my palate. Anyways, all right, sorry.
So concentrations, but a cup of light roast would probably have more than an espresso because of the quantity, right? You're only taking a little shot, whereas if you have a full cup of light roast, equivalent wise, you may be right. I think espresso made like ounce for ounce probably have more.
Yeah.
But if you drink a cup of light roast coffee, it probably has more caffeine than
interesting. That stuff is so diluted. There's no way.
You should fact check me.
I'm gonna fact
next episode.
For next episode.
All right. That's our end.
Dude,
that's our end. All right, with that, well, thank you for our indulgement here on Coffee Talk, and hopefully you enjoy some maple syrup with your coffee as well. All right, let's jump right in. Questions for today. So our main topic now is just opening a mailbag up, and we're going to ask some questions around crafting the Power BI workspace policies. Seth, if you do us the pleasure of reading through our mailbag today, it would be great.
It's a bit of a long one. Do you guys want me to pause after
good question.
Questions in order, or just go for the whole thing?
I'll go around all 6 bases.
Okay. I'll say go for it.
Mailbag. What should be the organizational policy for creating Power BI workspaces in order to support self-service Power BI within the organization. The factors that affect this are 1, to prevent the explosion of number of workspaces. 1.1, is it a problem if number of workspaces increase exponentially? Why is it a problem? We don't worry about the explosion of number of child folders in organizational shared drives, so why is this a problem in Power BI workspaces? 2, only one app can be published in a workspace. Therefore, even a single team will need multiple workspaces, contributing to the explosion of number of workspaces. There's a caveat there, depending on when this question was asked.
True.
3, who should be allowed to create workspaces? 3.1, does IT create workspaces when requested by end user teams? Should there be a naming standard pattern for workspaces? Why? If so, can you please suggest some naming strategies? Thank you for your podcast. I enjoy listening to it. Well, thank you for your question. And we'll get at it, I guess.
All right. Where should we should tackle this? We should probably maybe
first question's number 3, which is kind of weird.
I don't
know.
Is it though?
Drive.
Is it okay?
Well, for Tommy,
let's talk about the explosion of workspaces, right? Because ultimately, if we create policies, right, we're trying to manage something in the organization, right? The process of building things, trying to keep order to the chaos instead of just having chaos. Do you want to start with explosion?
I want to. Well, yes, I do.
Where do you want to go?
Start with the big bang of the workspaces. Just bang, and then there's a whole bunch of workspaces. But I would
back up with managed self-service.
Okay, that's where I was going to. The buzzword that I heard here was we want to do self-service. And I think I need to understand, at least I need to define what you mean by self-service. I think it's a very loaded word and can mean many different things. And I think a level setting your organization on what does that self-service, when you say self-service, give me a couple bullet points as to what that means. So Tommy, to you, what does self-service mean? How does that roll out to you?
Managed self-service, which to me is a very large distinction. And I believe you did say managed self-service. So when we're talking managed self-service, there's a few factors that you could see an organization working in that system. It is not just a federated team who's building content. And I think I'm going to stay vague here to say content starting off, but it is other teams. In the realm of managed self-service, though, it's highly policized, or there's process around who can create what and what content's available for those, we'll say, out on the hub and spoke of the spokes of the self-service side. They can usually going to be departments or teams, but the type of content and what content is actually getting distributed is highly monitored. And that's a large part of managed self-service. Self-service has a little more called freedom. But when we're dealing in the realms of managed self-service, it starts and ends with the semantic models. It starts and ends with our numbers and metrics, and who's creating that. It's usually a centralized team. And then how does that get distributed? It's very, I'll say, protected. It's not anyone can start and run with this at any given moment. No one wakes up on Monday and by lunch has access to be able to build and start creating reports in a normal, structured, managed self-service realm. If we're talking just number self-service, yeah, there's a little more freedom of what's available. I can just kind of dabble. But on the realm of managed self-service, there's a process to get there.
I don't think the user is saying manage self-service, though. It just says, their question clearly says to support self-service. So I understand your point around the distinction between managed self-service and self-service, but I don't think that's what they're asking about. They're just saying, we're going to roll out Power BI. There's going to be self-service happening. What does that look like? Seth, what does in your mind, what does self-service unpack like? You unpack that phrase to you.
I mean, well, it's either you just let it roll, right? So self-service could be a lot of different things. Hey, we have Power BI now. You guys can go play. You all have pro licenses, right?
Correct. Yes.
Create value for the business, and you some of it's going to work really well, some of it's not. But there's value that's created. If there wasn't, the tool wouldn't be as popular as it is. The issue with that for the organization in IT in general is like, it's kind of chaos, right? Like you don't know what you're going to get. It's going to be harder to kind of triage any issues because everything's going to be custom built for whatever the business unit or team or whatever wants and needs. And I think while the question doesn't say manage self-service, it's certainly asking questions around, what do you manage? What should you potentially do in an organization when you want to roll out self-service so that it's much more, so that I think the organization benefits from it more.
Okay.
So the way I kind of think about this in terms of just like an analogy that I've talked through with friends, but that I think applies.
It wasn't
here.
me. It was not. I'm not your friend,
no,
apparently.
Nope. Well, I mean, I have other friends.
Oh, okay.
Is it's kind of, and it applies here, I think, is
yes.
It's the difference between, hey, let's get a whole bunch of people together and let's, like, as all these people live together, you just there's no plan to the city that they create, right? Versus a city planner, or keeping it simpler, like just how do you move around the city? And that's where, like, somebody sits down and goes, okay, well, here's the 2-lane roads, and here's the 1-lane roads, and here's where traffic's going to go, and here's the stop lights and stop signs. And does that mean you're restricting movement of all these people? No, you're just making it easier for them to navigate and get around the city, as opposed to, like, and you can look at this in the world, as opposed to without that, what happens at intersections, right? Like there's chaos, like what direction are the people supposed to go? It's much slower. It's so that kind of, that theory of, like, you're not trying to get in the way of people or stop them from doing something. You're just trying to make it easier for them to navigate. And then thereby also when things go wrong, right, the services that are deployed to fix it know exactly where to go, and they can fix it easy.
Okay. I like that. I think it's a good definition. I feel like you're making the analogy of, like, okay, here's all the coastal cities versus the Midwest cities that are all squared and gridded out and has straight lines everywhere. It's very easy where we're going. And all the cities on the coast are all squiggly lines and roads that don't go in straight lines anymore. So I'll add a little bit of, I love both your definitions on self-service, and I think you both attacked self-service from a lens. I think I want to include a little bit more. I really liked your comment around, Seth, around licensing matters, basically. If you're a pro and premium per user, you're really not penalized or creating a lot of stuff. You can create hundreds, thousands of reports and data sets as long as they meet a certain threshold. So in that regard, you're encouraged to do self-service. However, if we transition over to premium capacity where I'm paying for a specific amount of compute or usage, I still want to enable self-service, but I want to do it with a bit more, like what Tommy was saying, was managed self-service. I want to be able to understand what people are creating. Are we not adding any bad actors or abusers to the system? And there's probably a mix here of, if we're talking premium capacity, what things should be on that premium capacity versus what things should just be in a pro workspace. So there's going to be some trade-offs, I think, here as well. My mind, as I think about self-service, is the organization needs to define what layer of self-service and what does that mean. A self-service, I think I've heard self-service defined as, I'm going to give you an app and here's a bunch of reports. You may self-service that report and download things that you need. That's a version of self-service. There's another version of self-service where I'm going to give you access to a data set. You can build your own reports in your own workspace. That's another version, I think, of self-service. Like, more control allows people to build more things. And now I think with Fabric, we're introducing, hey, by the way, I'm going to make these tables in a lakehouse. I'm going to let you shortcut to them. This is data we're going to give you. So I think as we walk our way backwards from app to semantic model to tables, there's kind of like, you need to define how comfortable and what is the skills of the consumers. Can they handle that? Is that something we're going to be able to give them? Are we willing to let that happen in our organization? So I like your thoughts there. I just think you need to define what that looks like first. So it sounds like, based on this user sitting our definitions together, this user is asking questions around that second layer, right? We have content. We're going to give everyone pro or premium per user license. It does not penalize us to have a lot of workspaces. what does it look like to then just open the floodgates a bit more and say, organization, build what you need to build?
Yeah. There's some really great points there, Mike. And one of the things that you touched on too is that planning stage of how you're going to roll it out. I wanted to do a hot take here, which is interesting to say that this mailbag was a cry for managed self-service, for much more structure.
Ooh,
However,
interesting.
it's missing one critical factor in the questions.
A critical juncture. Okay. What's that?
And maybe this is a hot take in itself, but really it's the flow of data is going to dictate the workspace management and how self-service is going to be deployed.
Say that again to me one more time. I think I got it.
Flow of data is going to
and you're thinking like potentially fabric items to semantic models to apps or reports, right?
Right. Exactly. Who's creating semantic models?
Okay.
How is the semantic model being created? Is in the first place? Is this already from a federated BI team? Is this coming from? Is everyone being able to create this, or are we dealing in a situation where, again, we already have certified super awesome semantic models? Is that already the condition that we're working in? So that's really going to structure in the policy on what we're doing in terms of workspace management and who's going to be creating what. So to me, I start there, and and it almost starts and ends there in terms of, yes, licensing is important when we're talking about pro and premium. Obviously, that's a part of the factor. The critical factor is the semantic model flow, or the flow of data throughout Fabric.
Yeah, but it's interesting you say that, but that would allude to the fact that all people could still be creating workspaces, or are you limiting it? Right? Because right off the bat, like, you have to decide, are you limiting who can create workspaces, or are you managing who can create workspaces? It's not the content.
Yeah. Well,
it's who has the ability to do it.
So yeah,
I like this, and I think licensing in this first part. So I like so I think now we're transitioning the topic to more like the explosion part of the workspaces. Who can create them? How much should we allow to create? I'm more comfortable. My opinion here, and you guys can weigh in on this. I'm more comfortable letting users create their own workspaces as needed if we've deployed something like domains, if we've deployed something that we have control around certification of content. If those two things are in place, I'm less worried about all the content being created in workspaces, not as concerned about it. So those two prerequisites, I think, are important for me to make sure that we lump users into groups. Right. Those users are then creating workspaces, and those workspaces are automatically getting tagged to appropriate departments or domains, so we can quickly figure out who owns what content in the organization. The certification part, I think, is incredibly important, because certifying content, I don't really care how many workspaces you make. I don't really care how many reports you make. There needs to be a threshold you need to meet in order to say something is certified and we can trust that data. I don't think you want to erode confidence in your organization by building a bunch of junk reports that don't really mean anything, or a lot of reports that are doing the same thing over and over again. So I think the ability for you to certify things or go through a process of certification really kind of weeds out a lot of the noise that potentially can be created in the company, and you can strategically highlight important data sets or important semantic models that users should be using. I'll just kind of leave those there.
So just to reiterate what you said.
Yeah.
If the first question is, is it a problem? Is increasing workspace exponentially, right? Like everybody can create workspaces. There isn't, explosion, whatever. You're saying that's not a problem.
I don't think it is.
You would say rely more on the certification process and
governance. Yes.
And the organization understanding that certain data is going to come out of certain workspaces.
Because I don't really want to stifle innovation, and I see a lot of teams building really good things inside their environments. They may not be perfect. And also there's a licensing story here, right? I don't want everyone abusing a Fabric capacity and overrunning the capacity and having us to pay a lot more money as an organization. But we also don't want to restrain the organization to find what makes value to them and how they can answer their data stories in their departments and their teams. So I err on the side of more openness, but doing some clear controls around important things finding the content that is most popular, most used, most leveraged in the organization, and putting guardrails around that very premium or high quality content.
I differ slightly, but I think it's more not so much on philosophy, but I think we're thinking in terms of size of volume. And I'm thinking in terms of the size of the organization itself, how much data they already have, and what of their resources are available. Myself, because I would err on the side of, especially if we have a flow of semantic models and how important they are, we already have that certified. I'm going to be a little more, I don't want 18 marketing workspaces or, if anyone can create them. I want to kind of roll this out. I don't want to say slowly but I also agree
Who
too.
cares?
No, it does matter, because then from a consumer point of hold on. So from a consumer point of view, that experience is subpar. There's another S word there that we'll use for after hours, but it's subpar. If I have 7 workspaces that are all slightly similar, or I have content that's all similar but not the same, and the report doesn't have a purpose because anyone's creating that. From a report innovation, great, awesome. You created a new panel that switches out. But from a consumer, especially if we're starting,
you're speaking to just wide open creation without any regard to what is in those 7 or 8 workspaces that you have that are marketing. What's certified? Who's the domain owner? Have you identified owners of those contents in the workspaces? And so if there's a question, to me, this is all a delegation of responsibility. If you're creating that stuff and it's trash, there's policies. The policies of the organization should be, there's only 1 or 2 owners of a workspace or admins. Those admins are the people that are responsible for the content coming out of that workspace. And
it's so easy for things to get out of hand, though, quickly, especially in a larger org. So if I have a lot more liberal starting, then it's very hard to backtrack. It's very hard. The hardest thing to get back from people is trust, or to backtrack data and access.
Not disagreeing. That's my point. That was my point exactly. My point is certification and domains help you administer what content is being created that is the most valuable and it should bubble to the top. Power BI is making data a commodity. Anyone can create it. It's going to be easier for everyone to use it. I don't know if I understand. There's no capability as one user or even the central BI team to know exactly what every reporting need is for every person in the organization. It's going to be impossible for one person to be that knowledgeable about all the needs of your business.
100%.
So you're going to have to let stuff happen sometimes.
Yeah, I think I find myself in the middle here, because if there's intentionality behind what you even said, Mike, right? Like, I'm creating domains, and then these people have to work within that domain.
Sure.
They're not going to know that, right? Like, inherently, or people coming in. So it's like, where does this structure of domain or certified data, or like, you don't know what you don't know kind of thing come in? And I think that, to me, the middle ground here is allowing a group to create workspaces, but it's easy for people to get added to that group. Like, it's a request, and along with that request, you get the information about the context you need in terms of, hey, you're about to create, objects within, this domain, right? Here's what you're part of. Here's the structure. Here's certification. Here's how the organization works. So as you're engaged in this fabric ecosystem, you're going to see a lot of things. When you see certification, this is what this means. If you need to build something, here's the process you need to follow. Here are some standards that we've created that make workspace creation successful in different business units and areas. You can follow this, right? And here's why, like, we think that's a good idea. But here's all the information you would need. And now you're part of that group. Now you can create workspaces, right? Because that at least pushes into the people that have the ability have at least the bare minimum of what we're trying to do, but it doesn't put handcuffs on them. And that's what I would do.
And I think you guys know I'm coming from a point too where I've seen the rise and fall of Power BI empires, because this says leads and this says leads, but they're different and there's no trust. And I've seen that burn down people's trust in data itself, and obviously the least path resistance. But I've also been on the other end shouting from the rooftop, there needs to be a better way of fluidity of data in an organization. This goes to people then, because we're talking about the process, the policy, the number of workspaces. This kind of goes into the next question for me personally, because I've seen the hardest way to distribute content is when it's the management of it is IT, and they've maybe dealt in the engineering side, or they've dealt on their IT, and they don't have a grasp of the potential of Power BI. It becomes very hard to get anything moving.
Okay. Yeah,
and I think that's the next place to start, where the resources here on who is driving the creation of workspaces and who's creating models, who's creating these gold models. Is this people that are very far away from the business, all IT? What's the ideal approach, I guess?
I think I agree with here, and we're talking about policies on things, right? As you guys are speaking about these things, I feel like there's some policy pieces that are coming to mind here, right? One policy that I think I'm hearing you say, Seth, and I would agree with this too, right? If you're a new organization and you haven't used Power BI and we don't have a data culture that's kind of robust, it probably makes sense to lock down workspaces and not let anyone create them, and only let a select few users or key users create workspaces. So this can be rolled out in a number of ways. It could be managed solely by a central BI team, or you can identify key department leads in every department you're going to work with, and work with the department lead to identify, okay, department lead, you're the one you're the one in charge of creating the workspaces for your team, department, whatever area of business. You're the only one we're going to allow to actually create things. With that comes this responsibilities and list out. We expect that all workspaces come with 1 or 2 admins. We expect that you have a contact person on every single workspace. When someone leaves your organization or moves on to a different department and you have abandoned or orphaned content, someone will be reviewing that quarterly. Set some of those policies around that team member. And I think those are pretty fair, opened policies to say, this is how we are going to manage the content or the workspace creation experience, giving them still what they need, create as many workspaces as they want, but yet still keeping some control, not letting a wild proliferation of just hundreds of workspaces just appearing quickly. Would you guys agree with that?
I would.
1,010%. And I'll touch on that because I love that so much that I think it deserves a bit of a re-emphasis here. The rollout methodology or the approach here, especially when you're dealing with a large org, works so well. I'm not saying it's the only way, but I want to, because the rollout stage allows you to pilot, it allows you to understand the most critical needs in the org, where, hey, we tried something, but you know what? We realized post-mortem with this one team, not the whole organization, but this one department, where we need to focus time because we did not give more proper training to people, or enough training, enough time for them to build the right things. We're realizing nobody's using it yet. And the early stage approaches to Power BI and a managed self-service rollout, going team by team, and also identifying a good candidate, because not every department's equal in regards to the resources they have available, rather than trying to do a much more global launch at once. So if anyone's in that stage, and I would focus on kind of pilot and rollout, because it really can help in terms of identifying resources and identifying critical gaps that you may have before you launch this to the greater organization.
In this question, is there a point around? I kind of wrote some more thoughts as you were talking there, Tommy. Right. One thing I think has not been talked about yet is the importance of monitoring the usage of said workspace. Mm-hmm. If you don't have a solid monitoring app that's looking at a number of activities occurring per workspace, how do you know which workspaces are going to need to be maintained? And how do you know which workspaces are the ones that need to be deprecated and turned off, or notices need to be made? Look, to your point, Tommy, sales and marketing, you have 8 workspaces. That is higher than your average department in your organization. Can you justify?
Only have 6 people.
You only have one person. Why do you have 8 workspaces? What's going on, and what can we do to turn that down and turn that off? So there's something there, right? So monitoring usage. What I will also add here now is I've been unpacking the whole Git experience. So GitHub and integration that with Azure DevOps. In Git, every time you build a feature branch for your workspace, it can create by default a new feature branch workspace. So just by the nature of doing development with developers on a workspace, particularly with using DevOps integrations, you could be spinning up just hundreds of workspaces that are purely copies of the main branch of code, but each of these branches, you could have, let's call, for example here, you have sales dev. You could have 7, 8, 9 different branches on sales dev of different developers building things for the sales team of different features. Not all of them will live on. Some of them you may kill. Some of them you may get rid of. Some of them you may merge back into main and then delete them. So what I see from Microsoft right now, the pattern of using DevOps to build on top of workspaces with Git is actually going to increase the usage of workspaces, and they're encouraging it. And I don't think that's wrong. I just also think it's important that we think about it and govern it appropriately. I think I'm okay with it. I'm okay with lots of workspaces being created, especially in a development experience.
I'm going to have to stop you because you mentioned the golden word, and that's Git. And we're talking about self-service. And I don't know if that goes in the same dish.
I'm talking about explosion of workspaces. This is just another area of your development platform that you're going to see a large proliferation. I do not want to submit a request for me every time I want to build a feature branch on top of something else. Now that's just me, the developer, right? I'm on the upper echelon of self-service stuff. I'm building my own things. I'm making my own content. Yeah. Like I'm on the higher end of a very technical architect level stuff here. Not saying that's wrong, but as that level, there's got to be some levels of permissions that are going to let the more educated or more not educated, more skilled people do what they got to do. You don't want to block them.
I certainly don't think that workspace by workspace permissions should be granted. Like I think either you have the permission to create workspaces or you don't, right? And that's where I'm like, should you have the information regardless of where you sit in the organization of how and why we create workspace? Yeah, but it's a trivial thing to go, hey, support, I need to be added to this group for workspaces, workspace creation. Great, here's all the material and information you need. Go have fun, right? Because then there's a gateway, or at least a checkpoint that says anybody who is creating workspaces has seen this material. That's important for them to understand. And that's all that you're trying to do is like convey information, not be a blocker.
But with that comes governance though, right? So I get it.
Totally agree. It doesn't, but that choice of a checkpoint means you're also, you as an organization should absolutely be monitoring what these people are doing. Like you can't have, I wouldn't think you would implement any sort of self-service without plans for how you monitor it. Because otherwise, how are you going to help triage or support? We just talked about that in a recent episode.
Yeah. And I think this dives very nicely into the next question in the mailbag, and I'll do it in the form of my father's favorite band. Who are you? Who is it? Who's creating?
I was just writing on that. Band? I was just writing on that point right now.
I really want to know. Does it? Anyone? The band?
Yeah. That's who?
Yes, I mean it's literally in the song. So no. So who can create workspaces? Who should be allowed?
I think this is going to depend on your organizational clampdown. I think there's going to be. I can't give you a single answer on this one because it's going to depend on how your organization handles this. If you are a top-down, centrally managed organization, no one can, and it'll have to be a ticket to open up a workspace. That's one option.
Each workspace.
Each workspace becomes a ticket, or something along those lines, right? Mm-hmm. Or there's a form you fill out and say, "I'm going to submit my request," and you can get back to it within 24 hours of a response time. Those are things you can do. I see organizations that used to be kind of the way you wanted to handle it, but now with all the proliferation of all these other experiences that are kind of workspace driven, anyways, there's also the opinion of looking at key individuals across the organization. And to your point, Seth, I don't think having everything leaning on centrally managed teams is the way to go for most organizations. Some will do that. I think there's another pattern here where you delegate that to key leaders across different departments. They are the ones that are responsible for their area. Again, it's delegation of responsibility. I don't want to manage everything. They need the ability to create what they need to create in their areas, and they're the owner of them. That's okay. The policies of our company say, you are the admin of this workspace, and if there's any issues with these workspaces or how you're not behaving, again, this is the point. Certification, domains, and monitoring are key things you need to have in place before you start doing these kind of things, because then you can say, are you abusing the system or are you behaving within the system? And then the last end here is letting larger amounts of area go into the organization, meaning large groups of people, anyone can start creating workspaces. However, I would put a very minimal barrier on that experience, whereas there needs to be at least some training, or here's how we perceive organizations with lots of creators of workspaces. Here's what it means. Here's what it means by responsibility of what you're creating in those workspaces. Here's what you're allowed to share, what you're not allowed to share. Oh, and by the way, if you don't behave and you start sharing reports directly through the workspace by giving people direct links as opposed to using apps and other things, that's not our policy. We want to clamp down on those kind of behaviors, and we're going to start pulling back your permissions, and we will remove your permissions if you don't behave according to our policy. So I think at a minimum, there's a little training piece here around what you think is appropriate in your organization before you give full open access to everyone to create workspaces.
Yeah, there's a few holes I'm going to push back here, and this is potentially where fireworks may fly. To me, you're going in the rational policy where people behave rationally, and especially if I'm initially starting with, even if I do training, even if I do, hey, we're going to have a meeting about workspace policies and what a workspace is and the reason it should exist in the first place. People, especially on departments and teams, and if I'm that far away from workspace creation, especially if I have certified data and people can connect to it, man, it's going to be so hard to pull back when people start going off the rails. And that's going to happen. Even if you have, hey, you got to follow these procedures. And this is an ideal state because there's an assumption here that with those people, they are, one, spending enough time with some centralized team to do the proper training, reoccurring meetings, or on either monthly scale just to check in, and their monitoring of that content. Even if you have a full scale solution of monitoring, which we've talked about before, does not come out of the box, is really hard then to take away. And workspaces are so critical. And I don't want to go back to the first one, how many workspaces, but man, the people who can create this and understanding what workspaces are already out there matters so much here. And I will push back there because people, especially in departments or teams, unless, again, one of their roles and one of their responsibilities and the org, not an extracurricular, or apologies for my porky pig, outside activities is Power BI. Unless this is part of what they do, I'm not giving people access to workspace creation unless this is part of their role.
It's an interesting point. A couple. One is I want to lean in. I think I resonate with what Mike was saying. Like, you stress ownership and what ownership of the workspace means, because there are responsibilities there. And I think that curbs some of what you're fearing, Tommy, because fine. Somebody could go through a process, not read any of the material, and just start creating workspaces. And then a whole bunch of bad stuff starts happening, right? Because they're allowing people into the workspace, they're giving them full permissions, blah, 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 whatever. The fact of the matter is when they requested that gets logged. They're the owner. They're responsible, right? And that's
Delegation
why policies are
of
in place in an organization. Yes. You assume responsibilities for what is happening in this environment.
Yes.
One of the things we haven't talked about, though, that like makes me go, is how if I'm a user and I need a workspace created because I want to go do a bunch of stuff. Well, obviously you don't have permissions to see which workspaces are already created. Maybe you just need access to one that's already there. And
discoverability.
Right. How do you create? I think there needs to be some sort of discoverability, which at the same time would probably remove a lot of the explosion factor, where somebody just needs access instead of actually creating a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy, and the only people that know that are the admins. Right. So I don't know.
Seth, I really like your point there, because there's a huge blind spot too. There is no discovery of, we talk about like the data catalog and where does your data live and what kind of things that are out there, right? You can share data sets into the data hub, and the data hub can span all data sets across all workspaces. And you can even do really cool things like using, again, this is where domains, I think, plays a really good role. You can filter by domain. Here's all my content that's coming from the sales domain or the HR domain or the operations domain. Those are good places to tag workspaces to have them be in a similar fashion. However, to your point, Seth, which I think I really agree with there, is discoverability of workspaces and what people created in there. Yes, I can't get access to the information, but I don't even know it exists. So we may have 8 sales workspaces because each person is doing their own thing. And what Tommy built in the sales team isn't working for Rob, and he's not building something that Sally's building. And we have different people trying to build competing products. Instead of having them all talk together, they're just going to build separate stuff. And I don't know if that's I don't know if that's bad. I don't think there's a problem with that, other than the fact that you're now not able to, like, there's nothing in the tool that lets you easily discover stuff like this. It just doesn't happen.
Well, I think it stresses the importance of the team that is building certified things, right? Or teams there is a clear path of vocalization of communicating that across the organization, saying, hey, you can use stuff out of here, right? Because there should be the team, right?
Certification
Not everybody's going to follow those same processes and standards, but it's the team that I think we're familiar with building, creating, managing, right? Like, so, but there has to be a lot of education around, like, I don't care what you do in this ecosystem, but the best stuff comes out of here. And, or if you want to be in a state where you're sharing things in a certified way out of your areas, these are the requirements you absolutely must follow in order for something to be certified. And that's where I think that comes into play.
Yeah.
The other,
the
other last part, you can't go. Yeah, go ahead and start talking.
I know.
Tommy, come on.
I think just to address some of the other questions, like the one app published in a workspace, that's no longer a thing, right? Like, so from
you have audiences now,
for workspaces that are designed for sharing reports, audiences work phenomenally in apps. I can have as many different apps, technically, right? Audiences in an app as I want to, and control the flow of external sharing through that.
It's still a single app. It's just what you see in the app is now different per users that are in that bucket of users. Yes, agree. I like that one. And I agree. That one's kind of a mute point to me anymore. I don't really think that's an issue. And I don't really hear people clamoring about, oh man, if I could only have one workspace where I could just distribute this to different people. I don't think that's a problem anymore.
And I know we're getting here on time. And I think, Mike, the only fundamental thing I disagree with you or differ with you today is the amount of workspaces and overlap is not necessarily a bad thing. I think that's a very poor thing for the consumer. It's funny because we just had a conversation last week about support and monitor content. And one of the decisions you need to make is, where do you start support, consumer or content creator, which kind of goes into this a tad. But to me, if I have overlapping data or relevant data in different areas, that's an incredibly poor experience. The idea with the apps and the app audience kind of goes in that favor too, in terms of, if you have the relevant content, this should be in the same location, rather than marketing and sales report, sales and marketing report, 2 different workspaces. And it's being asked to occur if you have overlapping workspaces that don't have a distinct purpose compared to one another. And so I think out of everything we've talked about, I really agree with, I love everything we've talked about. That's the only place I think that I would divert from.
But at the same time, like I'm torn too. I'm a guy who loves structure, right? But at the same time, especially from a consumer perspective, like everything is search now, right? Like, hey, go look at this report. It doesn't matter what app it's in. It doesn't matter where it's coming from. I mean, I don't know, horse apiece, right? Like if you're going to a different commercial app, I have 3 of them. Where's my report? Yeah, it's a little messy. I would agree, right? Can we consolidate? That should probably be the conversation of, like, you should just have access to this workspace instead of creating your own set. But I don't know how you control that. I don't know if it's worth trying to.
It's harder to migrate than create.
Well,
I can move content.
I'm not going to disagree with these points. I mean, I think there's some validity to them. Again, I don't. One thing I do want to point out that you mentioned, Tommy, that I thought was really useful here is another metric that we should be looking for here, in especially monitoring behavior, is we should be looking at any workspaces that have a high number of usage for viewing or exporting content. those workspaces should be caring about. And we should look at our organization, and we should also say, let's have a Pareto chart of the most used pieces of content in a bar chart, and then do the top 5-10% of those, are those things certified? And so if I'm really putting my money where my mouth is, we have a wealth of information. It's like a pyramid. There's going to be a lot of trash at the bottom. There's going to be departmental reporting. There's going to be like team level reporting. There's going to be departmental reporting. There's going to be enterprise reporting. Using that pyramid that Matthew Roach gave out is just immensely important. The larger the audience of the content, the more the content's being used, the more the content's being exported, the more important it is to the organization. And so in this workspace experience, I'm very willing to allow innovation to occur in the workspaces, but I really need tight monitoring around what this is. And to your point, Seth, I can't discover what workspaces are out there. This is a job, I think, that is part of the Center of Excellence. They need to go build the monitoring app, make sure that it runs, and produce reports that they share to all key leaders of the organization. Here's the list of all workspaces. Here's how much content's being used. Like, this should be organizational wide. It should be easy to get this information to these leaders or department people, because from that, you're able to make better decisions around, okay, who's allowed to make the content, how much content's being promoted into certified. And if you have, 8 reports in the top 5% that are not being certified, you better ask yourself a question. Why is that not being certified? And what do we need to do to go talk to those people or those teams to certify that content? Because it looks like it's becoming a source of knowledge in the organization. That fits the policy. Anyways, last comment here is, do you have any versions around naming schemas of things, naming for workspaces? Me personally, I use a very rough naming schema right now. I don't use it by department at this point, because you can do HR and abbreviations. I don't really like long workspace names, because long workspace names get cut off in the UI and you can't expand the UI. So I'm kind of an opinion. I want short workspace names. I also don't like the word dev, test, prod in them if I can help it. It does make sense when you're doing deployment pipelines. So maybe I would use something like that. But I really trying to use, if I want to group workspaces together of a similar type, I really want to use domains. Domains are great because domains can be filtered inside the workspace list. So I really want to, I'm finding more and more use cases as I'm diving into domains. They're being underutilized and they're very helpful for managing, organizing content. So domains are going to be your friend for a lot of workspaces and shoving those workspaces into domains. And maybe a policy is every workspace needs to minimum get tagged with a domain. Minimum. Like that way, I can filter out domain groups by types and start filtering the wealth of workspaces that are being created down to a reasonable level. All right. Anyway, I'll pause there. You guys have any thoughts on naming?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's something that you can do in that documentation that you're sharing, right? Like if there's standardizations around abbreviations for business units, because I agree, I like shorter the better, but the only way you get shorter is by abbreviating. And I think that with the proliferation of types of workspaces, maybe it's useful to do more of like a not prod or like shared, like what is the workspace that's going to be sharing content versus potentially building content, right? I think that is important, so that you have like one, like the business unit, and then like 1 or 2 potential other abbreviations before whatever the name of the workspace is. Because the only thing that naming standards like they're quick references to what's in it. I don't have to go figure it out every single time, right? And that's what's great about them is you're sharing what you're building is for the organization, not just for yourself or your department, right? And that's what naming standards help you do, is figure out like, hey, we see this stuff. Oh, it's one of these that we're all of the consumers are ripping through all the things, and that's where the reports live. That's why we see this sort of usage on it. Or this is our data pipeline, and these are the workspaces that we use with it, and that's why we see this sort of activity. Okay, that's okay. Versus having to figure that out, having to sort out if there's a problem or not, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and I think if we could probably do a whole another episode on naming conventions. I'll pause because I know we're getting short on time. If you want to hear us talk about it, let us know. But I think this is a whole episode.
I think this is a good discussion. I think we're unpacking, like, workspaces are cool, but we're unpacking a little bit more of the mechanics of how do you roll it out. The policies, I think, are important here.
Short answer, naming conventions.
True. And naming conventions is probably a whole other episode by itself. That being said, thank you very much for your time today. We appreciate your ears. We know your time's valuable. Thank you for spending an hour with us. And hopefully this gave you some knowledge or at least something to think about around policies and workspaces and how you want to roll that out in your organization. Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
You can find us on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. Make sure to subscribe and leave a rating. It helps us out a ton. If you have a question, idea, or topic, or workspace names that you want us to talk about in a future episode, head over to powerbi.tips/podcast. Leave your name and a great question. And finally, join us live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Central, and join the conversation on all of powerbi.tips social media channels.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We appreciate your time, and we'll see you next time.